Okay, so everyone, let's get started. This week, for some reasons, our dean, Professor Dai, is unable to give us a lecture as originally scheduled. So I would give you a makeup lecture. Um, the way I would do that is to, pick up a book and then share with you the major arguments in the first chapter of this book. And this book, as I show here, is a book specifically focused on writing PhD dissertations, which I think is highly relevant to our course. Of course, this is not a course specifically designed to help you know about how to write a PhD dissertation, but anyway, for just a makeup class, I was saying this is a suitable choice for us. And this book, Authoring a PhD, How to Plan, Draft, Write, and Finish a Doctoral Thesis or Dissertation, was written by Professor Patrick Dunleavy at London School of Economics and Political Science. Actually, this professor is a professor of government at LSE, so it's also quite relevant in terms of his affiliation, because he's exactly working in the same discipline as we do. So I will share with you some of the major arguments in this. Basically, in this chapter, the author talks about how you would prepare yourself for writing a PhD dissertation, and the title of this chapter is Becoming an Author. As you know, you're now doing a PhD, and your main mission is actually to write a PhD dissertation in which you produce some new knowledge in the discipline of political science or international relations. I'm not pretty sure about how much training you had previously in writing academic pieces. So in this makeup class, I will share with you some of the arguments by the author, and also perhaps I could also share with you my own experiences of doing my PhD. There are three sections in this chapter. The first one is authoring is more than just writing. I think that the author of this book, Professor Patrick Dunleavy, intentionally used the term authoring instead of writing for some reasons. And first of all, as he understands, there are a number of component parts of authoring, from investigating what to write all the way to publishing all or parts of it. So technically speaking, if we talk about writing, we talk about the way in which you formulate and then express your ideas into a written text, right? But here, if you look at the component parts of all authoring process, we could see that from here, about here, right? Drafting passages, writing the whole thing, and then revising and rewriting. Basically, belong to the process of writing. But beyond that, there are some other steps to take. For instance, before you really write something, you need to investigate what to write, right? You need to think about your research topic, your research questions, and also your research methodology before you actually do the research, and also before you actually write something. And then you need to plan your writing in advance by using an outline, such as an outline of your chapters or a work plan. Work plan means you when to do your field work, when to write, when to submit, all those stuff, right? And finally, after writing everything, you need to take some time to polish your writing, to correct your minor grammatical errors in writing, and then format your writing in an appropriate way. That means you are finishing it to be a quality dissertation that is ready for you to go to the door of defense, or for you to publish somewhere, right? This is the whole process of authoring. That is more than just writing. And then the author first talk about how the authoring skills are important, especially to PhD students like you. You need to write clearly about what you want to research and what your major research findings and conclusions are. Right here, he give us a set of 3 reasons why authoring skills are important. First, it is important because it helps you, right? Help you authors, achieve a very coherent argument. At least you need to make your argument understandable to your readers. If you write in a very awkward way, and then your readers don't understand what you're writing, your writing is a failure because you can't express clearly what your research is. And then it helps make original and substantive contribution. As I said, of course, every quality PhD dissertation must be original and must make some contribution to the discipline. But some people would make greater contributions than others. And what's the reason? Why they could make greater contributions than others? Part of the reason is that they could write better pieces. They could write better pieces to demonstrate their original research and their substantial contribution. So therefore, we need to write better pieces in order to demonstrate better our research contribution. And finally, that's also very practical, right? We have a PhD program of about 4 years. That means you need to write and submit your PhD dissertation, and then you pass the oral exam and finally receive a degree, right? But some people, in many cases, postpone their work, their submission, and their oral defense for 1 year or 2 years or even longer. That means you use much more time than others to do the same thing, to achieve the same goal of receiving a PhD. Therefore, it is important that you know about how to write better pieces in order to finish your PhD on time. That means you have 4 years here, and then by the end of the 4 years, you have already successfully written and submitted your PhD dissertation that is ready for you to have an oral defense. That is very important for your time management. Unfortunately, as the author explained, the training in authoring skills are actually very scarce. I think you should understand that this professor talked about everything in his book in a Western context because he's a British scholar talking about the trainings practices in Western countries, but actually many things that the professor talked about also relevant in the Chinese context about how Chinese universities train their PhD students, including you, right? Why the training here is scarce? Because many people just think it's more appropriate for universities and professors to focus their training on the substantive knowledge of each discipline, particular research methods. Perhaps you could also receive some training in research methods in this PhD program, and that means how you use certain methods to collect and then analyze your data. That's fine. That's very important. But the other thing is that training in research skills is different from training in writing or authoring skills. They are two different things. They can't be mistaken with each other. But in many cases, focuses are put on training in substantive knowledge instead of authoring skills. And then why this kind of training is scarce? Because many people just have some doubts on whether it is feasible to teach students how to write good pieces, because they think writing skills are academic writing skill, authoring skills are quite text specific or discipline specific. That means in one specific, the training and writing or authoring skills could be this way, but for another discipline, that kind of training could be fundamentally different. So you need to formulate your training methods in authoring skills in quite different ways for different disciplines, and even for different students and their different dissertations. That means training in this kind could be very costly. You need to tailor that kind of training to each text, to each discipline. So in many cases, universities and professors don't bother to do that because it's too costly. They just assume that as long as one student or one scholar could do very good research, they could naturally demonstrate their very good authoring skills. That means as long as you could do good research, you are able to write out what you have done in your research, and there's no need for you to receive specific training in authoring skills. That is actually a wrong assumption. The problems of this model, as the author mentioned, a kind of byproduct model of training in authoring skills has many problems. First, as I mentioned, it's very costly and time-consuming. And then, for many supervisors, they actually don't know how to train their students, how to write good pieces. They actually don't have the kind of concept of this kind of training. And then the result is that many PhD students prolong their study, prolong their process of thesis writing. They take additional years beyond, the assigned like 4-year or 5-year program. They use additional years to finish their PhD. This is time consuming. This is actually a waste of time because many people do the same thing with less time. And this is actually the required time for you to do the work, right? Like for your PhD program, you need to do everything within the 4-year period instead of using additional years. So the professor who wrote this book prefers a more systematic model of training. Why this kind of model for him is better than the byproduct model? The author said, the success of your doctorate, whether you are successful in completing your PhD, depends to a very large extent on whether you have a very good authoring skills. That means 40 or 50% of that depends on your authoring skills. Therefore, it's very important for you to pay attention to this kind of training. And then you need to have very good kind of training in both research methods, in both substantive knowledge in your discipline, and in authoring skills. You have two kind of training systems in parallel. They can't be just naturally kind of mixed with each other. The result will definitely be that the focus is put on the substantive knowledge of the discipline, instead of just focusing on training and authoring skills. And then the author also believes that authoring skills could be very generic. That means it can be trained in basically the same way in a number of closely related disciplines. That means it's not that costly to have kind of training like this. You could train students in different disciplines, basically with the same curriculum, and therefore they would all benefit from this kind of training in authoring skills. Okay, I just go through the first section. Authoring is more than just writing. I don't know whether you have any kind of training previously in your bachelor's or master's degree, and I think it's quite important first for you to know about the importance of authoring skills for your successful completion of your PhD program. And second, you need to pay attention to your authoring skills all the time when you are now doing your PhD, because finally your success depends on how to what extent you are able to write a good piece of academic writing, right? And then, if we have time at the end of this lecture, I will share with you some of my experiences of doing PhD with regard to writing, with regard to Austrian skills. But here, let's save the time and move on to the next section. Because in many cases, this kind of training in Austrian skills is very scarce. You need to pay particular attention to this, and just try to avoid this kind of misconception that trainings. Austrian skills could be a product, could be a byproduct of very good training and research skills or substantive knowledge in the discipline. It's not a byproduct. It needs more systematic training. That's the main point of section 1 in this book, right? In this chapter. And then in section 2, the author compares two kinds of major models in PhD training with regard to Austrian requirements. Of course, the author talked about this in the Western context. For that reason, parts of his discussion could not be directly, applied in the Chinese context. But certainly, we could draw some, implications even for our PhD training in China, because, China is always learning from the West about how to advance its, science. So in that way, we could also draw some inspirations and implications from this kind of discussion. And I also think you are to a certain degree, you could also be familiar with the major types of PhD education in the West. So the first kind of two main types of PhD education is the classical model and the taught PhD model. And there's a third model, which he calls the professional doctorate. This is not that relevant to us, because you're now doing a kind of a PhD that is not professionally oriented. You are doing a PhD that is academically oriented. That means the two former types of PhD education is more relevant to yours. The classical model of PhD education basically requires a student to write a big book type of dissertation with about 100,000 words. But for the taught PhD model, students just need to write a shorter one, and that kind of dissertation is the papers model dissertation. What is the difference between the two kind of dissertations? The big book dissertation is kind of a book, right? If you see a book, you could find a different. If you could find a coherent structure in which there are a number of chapters interconnected with each other. You have preface, you have introduction, and finally you have a conclusion. And in the main body of the book, there are a number of chapters dealing with specific questions interconnected closely. And then you have a conclusion based on all the chapters you have just written. This is the big book type of dissertation. But for the papers model dissertation, the dissertation actually consists of a number of relatively independent papers. That means for each part of this dissertation, you could see a kind of journal article style of paper. That means that kind of paper is actually ready for you to submit to a journal for publication. You could definitely try to publish part of this dissertation, directly in a journal. And the dissertation actually consists of a number of papers like this. Therefore, different parts of the dissertation are not very closely interconnected. And even though they are under this big theme, with a common big theme, actually their interconnection isn't that close. So here there's a kind of table comparing the two models of PhD education. So let's take a look at this later on. So let's first of all, discuss about the two models of PhD education in detail. First, about the classical model. The classical model basically is popular in Britain and in some European countries, and also some Commonwealth countries, right? Like Australia, whatever. There are a number of features of this kind of training model. The first is that the supervision by your supervisors or your supervisory committees are very personalized and very informal and very handcrafted. That means the quality of the supervision is very much dependent on whether you have a very good professor who is supervising you, and the style of your supervisor could actually determine your academic future, or at least the quality of your PhD program in the coming years. That means you have a very close interpersonal relationship with your supervisor. You meet your supervisor very often, individually, and you listen to your supervisor's mentoring kind of talking, and then you have some personal discussions with your supervisor, and the supervisor also have a lot of time to meet you individually, right? To give the advice for your research. And then for the role of the supervisor or other people who are involved in supervising you, like committee members, they basically involve in the British model. In the British model, they basically supervise, but they don't examine your dissertation. That means they could give you some advice about how you could improve your writing, but they will not determine whether your dissertation is finally qualified, and they could not determine whether your dissertation you will pass your defense, because they should not be participating. They should not participate in finally actually voting for or against this kind of qualification requirements. This is popular in Britain, that supervisors only advise you but not examine you. And then in some European countries, the situation is somehow different, because supervisors may advise you, and at the same time they would also examine you. That means they have a very big power in deciding whether your dissertation is qualified, and then whether you will pass your defense. In some European cases, some kind of differences can be found. They would emphasize more coursework. They would require students to take more courses, and they would have kind of supervisory committee consisting of a number of professors who participate in supervising or advising you to do research, and they would also impose a kind of active departmental tutelage upon you. That means they would have a number of regulations requiring to participate in student seminars, to submit something at certain stages of your PhD program, whatever, right? They have a number of regulations to do with you. And then they would basically prefer a collective model of supervising by a committee member instead of individual supervisors. This is the classic model. The taught PhD model basically is more popular in North American context, especially in the US. The difference first is that this kind of model would require students to take more courses, especially in the first 2 years of the PhD program. They basically focus exclusively on courses. They would take many courses. They would have to pass all of them, and after that, they would also have to take part in a kind of qualification examination in order to obtain the status of PhD candidate. They have a number of names to call that: the general examination, the comprehensive or the qualifying examination. This is about more requirements for coursework, and they would also have different requirements for the dissertation. They basically just need to write a shorter one, as we just mentioned, a paper's model dissertation of less than 60,000 words, and each part of the dissertation should have publishable quality, ready for submission to some journals, discipline. And basically, in this kind of model, PhD committee is more popular in terms of supervision, and you have a number of professors supervising you. One is your main advisor, and there are a number of other senior faculty members involved in this. They would do both advising and examining. That means they could give you advice on how to improve your writing, and finally, in your oral defense, it will also be there, determining whether you will actually pass the oral defense and receive a degree, and so on. So the author believe that this kind of model of PhD education is more popular in technical and mathematical social sciences, like economics, right, or statistics. This is more appropriate disciplines in which this kind of model is more popular. So here the table is to compare the two models of PhD education, and we can find the main differences between the two models. The classical model is very much focused on writing your dissertation, and then for that reason, coursework isn't very much important. It's actually only a very preliminary training, necessary for you to write good pieces, but it's not a main part of the PhD program. But for the top PhD model, coursework is much more serious, right? If you can't pass all the coursework requirements and pass the general examination, you are not able to proceed to the next stage of the PhD program, which is to write your dissertation, because you are not qualified yet. So here, about the form of supervision, they have some differences, because in the British and the European model, especially in the British model, they prefer a very individualized and personalized way of supervision. Even though in some European cases, supervisory committee is also popular, but in the top PhD model, the norm is actually a committee, dissertation committee, right? Here, the requirements for the dissertation is different, because for here you have to write a big book, a longer book. But for here, you just need to write a set of papers with a common bigger theme upon there, right? And where are the models more popular? For this classical model, it's more popular in British or European or Commonwealth context. But for the top PhD model, it's more popular in the US or in North American context. After the two models, we still have a third model, which is the top PhD model. This is not quite relevant to us, because it's a professionally oriented model of PhD education, very much popular in North American context, but it's only popular in certain kind of disciplines or professions, like medicine, clinical medicine, or law. The first are very special because they extend their coursework. The professional doctorate. They extend their coursework all the way to like 4 or 5 years. That means your PhD program is full of coursework. Almost everything is about coursework. You take you take courses all the time, right? And if you finish all the courses, you are very close to finishing your program. And then they even don't require students to write anything like a dissertation or final doctoral dissertation. But how to evaluate, how to examine whether the students qualified to receive their degrees? They have different methods. They would basically prefer more practically oriented methods of assessments. It would require students to write shorter pieces of work, like small papers, or they would prefer practical projects or other kind of non-written, projects. Like in medicine, they would require students to practice very often in hospitals, because this is the only way for you to know about how to train, how to cure patients, right? And in law, you need to know how to write legal documents. You need to know about how to practice law in a legal context in courts, right? That's very different for you to do, like you do research in your office. It's all mostly focused on your written texts, but it's different if that kind of profession is more professionally and practically oriented. You have different ways of examination. So there are 2+1 models of PhD education in the West, but in China we basically have a PhD model that in some parts, in some respects, resemble the classical model, right? So I would say the Chinese model of PhD education is somehow, in some respects, close to this, and in some respects, close to this. So it's a combination of the two models. I will talk about this later, but now let's move on to the next section of this chapter. So in the final section of this chapter, the author talks about the importance of managing your readers' expectations. Your readers would be, reading your writings actually very extensively. That means, they are, looking at your major research contributions. They are identifying your research contributions in a very rigorous way. But the first fundamental question for you to think about is why you need to think about your readers. For you, PhD students, you definitely know about the readers of your writing, right? First, your supervisor. The second, your committee members. That means the professors who are involved in advising and examining your PhD dissertations. They are your readers. So first, I think for many of you, if not all of you, right, writing a dissertation is actually the first effort for you to write a book-length project. That means it's the heavy project in which you have to write almost a book. This is actually difficult for both you and your readers, because you are, now writing a dissertation, which is perhaps the longest piece of writing in your academic career so far. And also for your readers, they have to read so long a text in order to identify whether you have any kind of substantial academic contribution. This is also difficult for them to do that. Therefore, this is in the process of your PhD program. And then beyond that, you also need to think about whether you are able to have your dissertation read by a wider readership. That means more people will be able or will be interested in reading your dissertation. Who are your potential readers? After finishing your PhD, many people will think whether I would convert my PhD dissertation into a book, right? Publishing a book means that you will be able to make your dissertation known to a wider audience. More people will read your writing and know about your research contribution. That's fantastic, right? If more people will be interested in reading your book. And then the other way of publishing is to submit parts of your dissertation as articles to some journals in your discipline. You publish journal articles which are shorter, but this is a more you can do that within a shorter time, right? To publish a journal article, or even sometimes only magazine article, or even newspaper article, right? That means you need to think about whether you have potential readers beyond your professors. And finally, the sad thing is that many students in the PhD programs never or seldom think about their readers. And they just assume that their readers will be always interested in reading your writings, reading your dissertations. They never believe that their readers could somehow be bored by the dissertations they are reading. So therefore, the students pay little attention to the readability of their dissertations. They will think, okay, my writing is always readable, so don't care about whether my supervisor will be bored by my writing. This is wrong assumption, actually. For professors who are involved in supervising and examining degree dissertations, we have a number of reasons to do that. The first and the simplest reason is that this is a duty for them, right? This is a duty for them to fulfill their mission, fulfill their fulfill their work requirements as professors in this professional in this profession in academia, right? And it's also a duty to the students they are supervising and examining. But beyond that, we have many other reasons, because professors are in many cases, are very eager to find very promising scholars and their original work. And if they find them, they will be actually excited to read. So it's better if you write very good pieces and prove that you are a very promising scholar, and therefore your research is very original, making substantial contribution to the discipline. And then the readers, the professors who read your dissertation will be very much excited because it's actually kind of enjoyable work to read promising scholars' research work. And then for PhD students, they are doing PhD in order to prepare for academic career. That means after receiving your PhD, you basically believed that you are able to conduct research as an independent scholar in a discipline. That means helping you do your PhD is to introduce you to a profession, introduce you to a discipline. And this is also very important for us to train a new generation of scholars in the discipline. This is also very much the duty of the professors in the profession. So we need to think about, whether the professors are fully motivated to read your book, read your dissertation. And if your dissertation are written in a very good way, very attractive to your readers, very readable, and very original, making substantial contribution, and then definitely your supervisors and other professors will be very happy to read your book, or read your dissertation. And finally, they also talk about how you could guide your readers better in order to, make very coherent arguments, and finally make your readers recognize your research contributions. The first specific, skill the author mentioned is to use properly the orientating devices. That means after you finish one section and you want to move on to the next section, you need to use a few words, a few sentences to guide your readers that I'm just finishing this and moving to the next subtopic of this. So this would help your readers better understand the logic of your writing, and to better understand the transition from one section to the next, from the first section, from the first chapter to the next, and so on, right? These are what the author called the orientating devices. And then, the next 2 points are interconnected. The first one is about literature reviews. Before you actually conduct research, you definitely need to review some of the previous research done by other scholars. And in addition to summarizing their major research arguments, you also need to comment on their research by saying that, okay, I think their research is somehow good or somehow bad or whatever, right? You need to comment. But you need, as the author wrote here, you need to be very cautious when commenting on previous research because, as the author said, first, perhaps you can't completely avoid using labels to describe different schools of thoughts, and that's fine. But the next step, the next kind of thing you need to do is to identify your own affiliations with the different schools of thoughts you just mentioned. Are you part of one particular school of thoughts, or are you opposing the school of thoughts you just mentioned, and you want to do something original, do something completely different? But anyway, you need to take sides in academic debates, right? In some certain debates, there are opinion A, opinion B. Are you agreeing with opinion A or opinion B, or are you disagreeing all of them, and then you want to propose a new kind of argument? That's very, very important. And if you have arbitrary comments on certain kinds of schools of thoughts, you will somehow get into a trouble. Because you need to then clarify what kind of affiliations you have, right? And then move on to the next. In many cases, some students just overestimate their research contributions. They will think, my contribution would make fundamentally different research findings or conclusions, and therefore I would transcend all the previous research and make open a new horizon in the discipline. I will be the top guy in the discipline because I made a fundamentally different new breakthrough research project. This is actually overestimating your research contribution because you could criticize the previous research because they may have some problems like this or that. That's all fine. But the next thing for you is to convince your readers that you are actually able to overcome all the problems you just mentioned. And that means you could make better research, make better writings, you could do better research compared to the previous generations of scholars. And finally, if you can't do that, that means if you can't demonstrate that you are doing good research, you are doing better than the earlier generations of scholars, you will let down your readers because you are not delivering on your promises of doing much better research. So you also have to be very cautious about, commenting on different schools of thoughts, your own affiliations with them, or your comparative, contributions. Because if you are not able to do that, you don't say that I will do, because you may actually have the same problems as the earlier generations of scholars did, right? They had their own problems, and therefore their research is still limited in certain ways. But when you are doing your own research, you may actually encounter the same or similar problems, and finally, your research is also limited in a number of ways. So be careful and be very honest about your own research capability when commenting on previous generations of scholars. So this is basically what the authors, what the author of the book talked about in the first chapter of this book. It's a general introduction about how authoring skills are important to PhD students, and then what are the different requirements in different models of PhD education. And finally, for you as authors, how important it is for you to manage your readers' expectations. And if you want to read more, and if you find the arguments in the book very interesting to you, you may refer to this book and read more about this. I would definitely believe that you will benefit from your reading of this book. This is a very much hands-on guidebook with which you could know better about how to write a PhD dissertation, because you are going to do that very soon in your PhD program. So in the rest of this lecture video, I would somehow share, parts of my PhD experiences about almost 10 years ago. I did my PhD in sociology at the University of Hong Kong. So when I was reading this book, when I was preparing for this makeup lecture, I was also thinking about my own research experiences as a PhD student. So here I could share with you some of my thoughts. In terms of the scarcity of training and authoring skills, I basically agree with the author. Even though I actually had, very fortunately, I had some training when I was doing my PhD at the University of Hong Kong. But actually, that kind of training was provided to me and other PhD students at the University of Hong Kong by the graduate school. The way is like this. We have two sets or two categories of courses to take as PhD students. The first category of courses were provided by the graduate school, and they were provided to students in a number of faculties, in a number of departments in different disciplines. Even though they have certain kinds of arrangements, like you as a student, a PhD student in sociology, you could only choose a course targeted at social sciences students rather than targeted at science students. But that kind of categories is quite broad. That means for me, like when I was taking the course provided by the graduate school, I had classmates majoring in political science, in education, in geography, whatever, right? They were all students in the Faculty of Social Sciences, but the can take the same course provided by the graduate school. And the aim of those graduate school courses is to train students how to write decent academic pieces in English, and also how to present in English. Anyway, it's not about the substantive knowledge in your own disciplines. It's basically about the generic skills, as the author here mentioned about the generic authoring and presentation skills in English. I think it's very helpful. And they have very detailed teaching arrangements, like they will tell you how to write appropriate literature review, in which you have to be very careful about your wording, your language, your sentence structures when writing your literature review. And then you have to be skillful in demonstrating your stance after summarizing this previous scholar's arguments. That means you first need to summarize something, right? Scholar A says something, scholar B says something, and then what is your own comments? What is your own opinion about their research? You need to show your stance after summarizing. That is the importance. That is the place where your writing skills could be very important. You need to be academically relevant, right? In first summarizing very clearly their research arguments, and then show your own stance. And then they would, require us to write our own research proposals based on our own PhD topics. And finally, they would have some individual tutoring. That means I would take my proposal to the instructor, and they would give me very detailed comments on my writing in an individual face-to-face way in the end of the semester. And during the semester, we have a lot of discussions about how to use English properly in writing academic pieces. This is a course, the name of that course is thesis writing. Thesis writing. And the other course I took was how to paraphrase. This is specifically about how to properly paraphrase other scholars' writing when you are writing your literature review, right? As I just mentioned, literature review is very important in academic writing. And how to understand paraphrase. Many people had this kind of mistakes during the past few semesters when I was teaching them in the school, in their master's programs. Because they just copy, right? They just copied whatever other people wrote without paraphrasing. That means they use the same words, they use the same sentences. They don't try to use their own different languages to express, to convey the same thing. I think, paraphrasing is a fundamental writing skill in academia. So that course was specifically targeted at how to paraphrase. I also found that very helpful. So as I mentioned, writing skills consists of a number of things, and then in addition to that, I also took a course which basically means academic presentation in English. In that course, we were trained how to present our own research in an academic way, but also in English, right? We practice with in the form of small group discussion among a number of PhD students, and then we have opportunities to present at the end of the semester our own research topics to the rest of the class. It's also very good way of practicing. So the main point here is that all the courses I just mentioned were provided by the graduate school, not individual schools or departments, and they were not focused on any specific discipline. They were actually generic courses provided to a wide range of disciplines, but in certain categories like the social sciences, the sciences, whatever, right? So I think if you have any kind of training like this about writing authoring skills or presentation skills, that would be very helpful for you. And also find that that kind of training in the first year of my PhD program is very helpful for my later years when I was writing my PhD dissertation. So the main types of PhD education, there are two main types in the author's writing, and I think some of you may have experiences of the two main types. For me, I was doing my PhD about 10 years ago at the University of Hong Kong. As you might know, it's a university set up by the British colonial government in Hong Kong, and it's actually the first public university in Hong Kong, and therefore it's definitely a very British model of training. So in that sense, my PhD education was closer to this classical model. It's very much focused on thesis writing. I only had to take courses in the first year of my PhD program, and I found that even though they were helpful, I mean, it's relatively easy for me to pass all the courses and receive enough credits for me to move on to the next stage of my PhD program, that is to write a dissertation. And then if I compare my own experience with my fellow students at some other universities in Hong Kong, like the Chinese University of Hong Kong or the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, they would have they had a different model of training. Basically, at the Chinese University of Hong Kong and the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, they adopt an American, model closer to this taught PhD model. So they first had to take many courses in the first 1 or 2 years of their PhD programs, and then on top of that, they also have to take take a comprehensive or qualifying examination. I heard that they had to take the exam for a whole day, for about 6 or 7 hours. Even though it's an open book examination, it's also very exhausting to have a whole day of examination. And only by passing this qualifying examination, they could move on to the next stage as a PhD candidate for writing a dissertation. And so that is the difference in terms of coursework, right? I had one fellow colleague in my PhD program. She actually dropped his previous PhD program at the Chinese University of Hong Kong because he thought he was wasting her time taking the courses at the Chinese University of Hong Kong for almost a semester. Why he thought it was a waste of time? Because he thought he fully understood what he should write, in her PhD dissertation, but the university actually required that all students must take courses, many courses in the first year of the PhD program. So he dropped the PhD program there and, moved to the University of Hong Kong to receive her PhD, because at the University of Hong Kong, as I mentioned, they basically prefer to have less coursework requirements, and then to have the students, able to focus more on thesis writing. In terms of supervision, I have two supervisors, the primary supervisor and the co-supervisor. Why I have two supervisors? Because my primary supervisor actually had me as his first PhD graduate student. So the requirement was that if a professor supervises a graduate student for the first time, he should have a colleague, a senior faculty member, as his student co-supervisor. That's arrangement. You could see that it's closer to the British model. But in the U.S., they would have a committee member. They would have a main advisor, and in addition to it, they would also have a number of other faculty members who sit on the dissertation committee to give advice to the students. And then in terms of thesis requirements, I was required actually to write a big book thesis. That means I would write a dissertation which is longer, and it consists of a number of interconnected chapters. Actually, I wrote a dissertation of about 180,000 words, which later on I thought is too long. But even though it's obvious that it's close to this kind of model, but I also know that in some kind of American or Canadian universities, the PhD students are required to write a set of a number of small papers, and then they combine the 4 or 5 papers into one dissertation with a common bigger theme upon them. On top of them, I read through a dissertation in sociology written by a PhD student at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, and it's of this model. So that dissertation consists of I think 4 or 5 parts, and each part of this dissertation is actually a separate, kind of paper. And that guy also submitted a few parts of his dissertation as articles into to some journals to seek publication. opportunities. So it's shorter and it consists of small, papers, independent papers. For the, what are the regions where the models are more popular? In Hong Kong, it's kind of diverse because at the University of Hong Kong, where I studied, it's quite a British. So that means the model of training for PhD is very much British influenced in terms of coursework, in terms of supervision, in terms of thesis requirements. But at some other universities in Hong Kong, like I just mentioned, the Chinese University of Hong Kong or the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, is kind of American influenced model, focused on more coursework requirements, and something like that, right? And then for managing your readers' expectations, here I need to point out, the necessity for you to think about your future publications. I know some of you may not be, scholars or professors after you receive your PhD, but I think some of you still would have this kind of chance to work in academia after, receiving your PhD. And for others, even though you won't be professors, you won't be scholars, it's also a very happy thing if you see your PhD dissertation finally, come out as a book, or journal articles, or magazine articles, or even, newspaper articles, right? So think about the, possibility of publishing your PhD dissertation or parts of it in future. Therefore, you could have a wider readership. For me, I based on my PhD dissertation in later years, I published a few journal articles. Most of them were in Chinese, and that means I translated my English dissertation, parts of my English dissertation into Chinese and published in some Chinese journals. And I also published one article in an English journal. And in addition to them, I also published a book based on my PhD dissertation. And in the process of my publishing the book, I actually cut down substantially. That means, as I just mentioned, I wrote a very long dissertation of about 180,000 words. And finally, the book that I published has only, less than 100,000 words, about, I think, 90, like this, the maximum, basically the length of the big book thesis about this, right? 80,000 to 100,000. I think the length of my book was about 95,000 words. So it's within the range here, right? Within the range here. So that means I cut down substantially. I first of all condensed very much the literature review, because I think many of the parts of the many parts of the review are not very relevant to my topic. So I, deleted a number of parts in it, and then I also deleted even some chapters which I also think less relevant to the main theme, and then I added a new chapter to make my writing more coherent and more, focused on the main theme. So that's the way I converted my PhD dissertation into a book. So for you guys, you also could think about your future possibility of publishing your dissertation or parts of it. That's very, that's fantastic. If you have a wider readership and more people will see your research contribution, and they will recognize your research contribution as potential, as scholars or whatever, right? So that means when you write your PhD dissertation, you should also think in advance about your readers and your potential wider readership when you are still in the PhD programs. And also think about your supervisor, definitely, right? Because your supervisor would be your primary readers of the dissertations. You should make your dissertations very readable to them. Don't let them always feel that it's very boring to read out dissertations, because in my own experiences, I, in many cases, have to read some kind of, frankly speaking, very terrible writing, either at the bachelor's degree level or at the master's level. So I would hope that at the PhD level, you would be able to write better pieces, and therefore you won't let your supervisors feel bored when reading your dissertations. So when writing, there are a number of skills the authors mentioned, and it's up to you whether you would adopt certain kind of specific skills like using orientating devices. But definitely you need to pay attention to this literature review. Very, very helpful when you're commenting on other people's research, and also demonstrate your own research contributions at the beginning of the research, because at the end of this dissertation, you have to deliver on your promises, right? You have to demonstrate that you are really able to make substantial new contributions of dissertation. So that's pretty much the topic I want to discuss with you about Austrian skills. As I mentioned earlier, if you have time and you have interest, you could choose to read more chapters in the book, which I think would be very helpful for you to write your own PhD dissertation. It's kind of a very practical guidebook for you. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you.